We have talked about how Adlerian therapy is creative, that one doesn't actually follow steps in the therapy. But for the sake of teaching therapy to students, it's sometimes helpful to perhaps artificially divide the subject matter a little bit.
So, oh yes, in the teaching, yes.
Okay, so arbitrarily right now I'd like to make some proposed divisions and see if it can be a springboard to discuss some elements. For example, certainly in the early stage of therapy, well, first one is attempting to make a relationship that is primary.
Yes.
And within this relationship, one is attempting to promote cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
But then we need information. We need to find out what is bothering.
We get information while doing the other.
While doing
yeah.
the other. When the person is talking about their situation, and they give you perhaps, let's say they're very articulate, very open, they give you a lot of information, and you begin guessing, and you have some ideas already. This may be so. And let's say you might even be able to interpret something. Do you have a tendency to hold off explaining things in the early stages?
Yes, because I want to be sure that I am not led on a side road. And of course you have to train your memory in such a way that you recall all these things very easily. Don't forget that the person himself does not know what the real problem is. So you have to find how to interpret out of what he is telling you what the real problem is that is hidden behind what he is telling you. Because he is telling you something that recently has happened or that he cannot find or the solution for. Say, for instance, a woman comes to talk to you about feeling so miserable and she cannot sleep, and she has taken sleeping pills, and then she is so groggy the next morning. And what has recently happened? Well, it so happens that half a year ago she has lost her husband. So you let her talk about the husband and the relationship, and you want to get some information about how the couple as a couple functioned and the circumstances, and she will tell you an awful lot about that. Now, what has she done to overcome the loss of a beloved husband? That is the question to which you have to find the answer. And she will tell you all sorts of things that have been going against her. Now you have to conclude, what kind of a person does this? Mm-hmm. What kind of a person is she? So you want to know more, and she can tell you more about children, and then all of a sudden you get a picture of the oldest child has done this for her, and the next child has done that for her, and friends have done this for her. And logically, you have to ask her, how much did your husband do for you? And you find that she is a pampered child who didn't do anything for herself, but who now misses the man who has done so much for her. And the follow-up was, in the first month of mourning, that the children took over the role of the father. Now where does she come in? And where does her activity come in? So this is what is going through your mind, and how you get the picture, and how you get to find her lifestyle. And then we can go back and ask about early memories, childhood memories.
How do you actually ask for a memory? Do you phrase it in a particular way?
Well, I have found that it helps to get memories by establishing your relationship such that people feel that you approve of them, that you have accepted them. Then they will do something that pleases you. And I have often said, it seems to me that you have a good memory. Oh yes. Well, how far does your memory go back? Does it go back in early childhood? What is your earliest memory? And I get the memories. And we also have the forms that we can let people write out their memories. So this helps. And they are very willing to give this. And they don't know, I do this in the beginning because they don't know what the conclusions are that I draw out of it.
If a person gives a memory very briefly, without much detail, without much color to it, do you sometimes ask for a little more about it? If they say simply, well, my father picked me up in the air and sort of tossed me about and then put me down. Would you ask if anyone else was there?
I can wait till I get the memories that I want.
I see.
I don't have to press for that. But you may get this difficulty that people say, well, I don't recall anything before my 11th year. Now I know that we have to find out what happened before those 11 years that had to be so deeply buried that you can't remember anything. So then I am suspicious about the relationship between this person and his parents. And I ask a lot about the parents. And I get a lot of information about the parents. And then I come out with my conclusion about how this particular person reacted to his parents. And either were you terribly afraid of your parents, were you often punished, were you dissatisfied, did you disobey, I mean all kinds of things, what just presents itself. And that is a conclusion that you get out of what he tells you or she tells you about the parents.
Would you ask directly the question of how did you feel about your mother or your father?
I would rather come back to the doing, because the doing sometimes gives an immediate expression of the feelings in a person's facial expression and in what he tells you. And then come out, did that make you mad, or did this so, or did so, or and then you get back into all these background things.
If you ask,
and then you know that it connects with what they are doing now, because you see, you don't ask just to find out what happened in the past, but you know that you want to connect what happened at that time and was misinterpreted to what is now still misinterpreted. You make that connection.
If you ask about the parents as such, would you attach any significance if the individual mentioned the mother or father first in describing their parents?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes it is the person who is mentioned first who was the one who pampered. And sometimes the person who has the greatest influence is mentioned first, but that is not a rule. You have to be cautious with these things, that you don't make a rule out of something that presents itself.
Let us say the individual talks about brothers or sisters. Are there particular things that you'd like to know there, or is it just the relationship or the estimate of oneself in relation to the brothers and sisters?
There is an awful lot that comes out and that you evaluate when a person begins to talk about brothers and sisters. Usually there is a preferred one, and usually there is one that they haven't liked, and sometimes they got along with everybody. I also want to know which place they have in the the whole constellation, family constellation, and I want to know more about their feelings that they express now towards the brothers and sisters when they were children, because usually there is a similarity. And we find a lot of the response that the person gives by his telling how he dealt with a particular sister or brother, or what they were doing, or how they teamed up, or whatever goes on. It is all dynamic. It is the actions and the things that counted that stick in a person's memory. And they may be true or they may not be true. That doesn't make any difference. It gives you an impression of that person's lifestyle and how he dealt with certain circumstances and with certain people.
Would you want to know anything about the child's early aspirations, like what he wanted to be when he grew up as a child?
Well, sometimes, but that also changes very much.
Mm-hmm.
I would be very cautious in saying, do you still recall what you wanted to become as a child? And you get very often, well, I don't remember, but I think I wanted to be a conductor of the train or something like that. Mm-hmm. Always things that are not realistic, except that if they want to be in the driver's seat, you know that that is a particular thing to watch. And if you get an affirmation, then you know a lot about that person.
Would you be interested in their early school situation?
Oh, yes.
Like,
sure. Because that is being getting into a new situation. And first day of school is important to know. And also how they acted in school and what they did with their work. Their attitude towards work shows very much in what they are doing or have been doing with homework and schoolwork. Yes, all these things. Preparation for work actually can be found very much in what they did in school.
That beginning attitude towards
Oh yes,
towards
very
tasks.
much. Yeah. But again, I say all these things have to be affirmed. What Adler stressed, and I can't tell you how often he told us this. When you come to a conclusion, write it on the blackboard with chalk and have the sponge in the other hand. And he said the same thing about diagnosis. He said, be very cautious.
Now, when you make your cautious diagnosis, do you have a preferred form or style of doing this? Do you like to give it a kind of an image? Do you like to put it in terms of a goal? Like I've heard you talk about a person as having a kind of a princess or a queen lifestyle. It seems like a very neat, abbreviated compression of the point of view. Do you tend to make such abbreviations in your mind?
Yes, I do. However, then I know in which direction to help the person. You see, it is, you help yourself in a way to help this person change towards a different goal. Because we know we cannot have so many queens and so many princesses in daily life. So people have to function together with each other and not feel above each other.
What do you do with the imperious queen, let us say, who looks down on the others and tries to rule with various devices? As what, you see, you know this at the very beginning.
And what do I do about it? Sometimes in the beginning you cannot explain very much, but then if there is another complaint coming, you bring the complaint and the unfortunate thing that they tell you that has happened in their lives in perspective to the idea of the queen or the princess or whatever it was. And then they begin to see that they really acted that way. And if you say, is this the way you really want to function? They invariably say, no, I don't. But I see that I did. And then it is recognized, and then they come with examples that they have found themselves where they tried to do this and caught themselves and didn't do it anymore. And sometimes get very lost in what do I do instead. And there you have the creative side again. Well, what would you suggest doing? Because I'm not giving you an advice. I'm not telling you what to do. Not that I say this, but I always ask and keep asking long enough till I get an answer and say, well, that would be something that you might try, even if I know that it is not the right answer yet. Because then they make new experiences and come out with such and such, but I didn't particularly like this or I didn't like that aspect. All right. Then how could you change that? What would you do next time? How are you going to handle that situation? Now, if you had to do that situation over, how would you handle it now? Well, when I come to think about it, I could do, and that they have their other idea. You see, I don't do anything. I just challenge that they begin to think and begin to act in a different way. And then when they feel that the success is so much better, that they all of a sudden can sleep much better, that they don't need sleeping pills anymore, that they meet other people and feel that they are not judged all the time. Don't forget that one of the very bad things in this society is that most people live with what I call a report card. And they constantly judge what they are doing, whether they did the right thing or not the right thing, how people will judge them, what they will think about them, what they will say behind their back, etc., etc. And constantly afraid, there you have the inferiority feelings, that they don't measure up to the tremendous image that they want to present. So the tremendous image has to change to normal proportions of being just a human being, and the report card has to be burned.
When you say report card, it somewhat suggests the idea that the schools have been a accessory to this problem.
Well, I cannot deny that. I think it was very fortunate that I studied at one time with Maria Montessori, and that in Holland we had Montessori schools that went up to university. And the system was that children could judge themselves and could go at their own speed. They didn't know what a report card was. And there were some who went through elementary school and then went to other schools that were not Montessori any longer, and therefore were trained in their last half year to know that you could get a report card with numbers on it. Here it is the alphabet,
letters,
and
yes.
we had the numbers from 1 to 10. And I have seen the reaction of these children because I was very intrigued to know how they felt, and they laughed their heads off. They said, "This is so funny. There is a number for what I have been doing." And they thought it was funny. So they were completely oblivious of the fact that your product can be expressed in a number or in a letter or whatever it is. And it didn't affect them that badly because they worked for the result that they wanted. And if they were not satisfied, they corrected it. Or they helped each other to correct it. That is why I like the Montessori school so much in Holland. They were asked to cooperate, to work with each other. And a stronger pupil was put to one that didn't know a subject so well, and they helped each other. And then they went to sit in another part of the room. It didn't matter. So that was a lot better.
So that's much better training.
Yes.
Yes, for a self-evaluation.
Oh, yes. And here I find that we have quite a punitive situation in schools. I have seen at least plans for what to do if children had misbehaved in such a way, or if they had been playing hooky or whatever. And instead of helping them and letting them stay in school, they were sent home. Now, I thought, what is going to happen if both parents work, for instance, and the child is sent home? I can't see it.
Apparently the teachers are not that well trained to understand and deal with.
Well, maybe a lot of teachers want to do differently, but there is the hierarchy of who dictates what, and you all have to obey under that hierarchy, and that is not, I think, very helpful.
Let us, if we can, sort of come back a bit to the working with the client. Do you place much emphasis in the appearance of a person, how they dress, how they groom themselves? Does this catch your eye unless it's very unusual?
If it is unusual, yes. But if it is ordinary, well, then it is nothing particular.
What about movement itself, like the way a person sits, the way they gesture, their general carriage? Do you deliberately, or at least intuitively, praise this as part of the picture?
No, I do not mention it, but I note it. And people who are very discouraged, of course, stand and sit and walk very differently from people who are courageous. Mm-hmm. I have never seen a courageous person come in.
Good point.
No, they usually have a lack of courage. And sometimes people are very apprehensive and sit at the edge of the chair. And they do not dare to let go, so they are afraid to be found out. Yes, all these things are signs, and they tell you something about the person.
What about also the tone of voice, or the choice of words? How much do you ascribe to this, or is this also a little something you may note and just...
I make a note of it, yes. And I don't know in the beginning how much weight it carries. That will come later. Also, interruptions, or a person who wants to talk and talk and talk and talk, which rarely happens, but it has happened at times, that the person kept talking all the time. And then the only thing I can do is praise them that they have talked a great deal, and that next time we have to talk together about the things they said.
Gentle hint.
A gentle hint in the direction of cooperation.
Yes. Now, we have talked also about empathy, being tuned in to the person's feelings, their situation, their thinking. And you have once described to me a kind of an image for this, where it's almost as if you either fill up on the person or permit yourself to enter into their world and their shoes. Do you have the sense of really almost identifying with the person, or letting go of yourself and becoming the person? How far does this get carried in your own experience?
I think that I close myself out and identify very strongly with what the person said, so that I feel the way he feels, and under the circumstances, if I had been that person, might have acted in the same way, so that I have a deeper understanding of where the person went wrong by a comparison to what is a more normal way of handling the situation. It is in comparison too. So, yes, you go along, and you go along all the way with what the person tells you, and say, oh yes, but under those circumstances I would have done entirely differently.
Okay. Now, you put yourself in their place and you can feel what they're feeling. Can you also get a sense of actually being able to think in the way that they think? Their private logic.
Their private logic is demonstrated in the way they present things to you, because they use the same tactics with you in the beginning. So you get that, I would think, in a different way. It is very hard to separate these units because it comes as a totality.
It comes as a totality when you have done it for 40 years, but when you're teaching it to students, one takes a little abstracted look.
Well, yes, but you cannot divide it in pieces. You have to take it as a totality, and maybe get parts of the totality and later get a complete totality. But no, it is not a division of several aspects. I would say the total person comes and gives me the image, and out of that I know in which direction he has gone wrong and where I can help, so I can immediately at the end of the first interview encourage him, and that we together are making an effort to work this out.
One last attempt at finding your approach in this empathic stage. I've heard one therapist talk about how in trying to get into the feelings of the other person, they would go so far as to duplicate the posture of the person to get a kind of a parallel sense of how that person might be feeling. Do you ever find yourself doing this, even perhaps?
I don't need it, no.
No, you just observe it and sense it. Okay. Another stage, I'm using this word very conservatively here, because I recognize there are no real stages in therapy, but a way of abstracting work, is what we have talked about in the past as a kind of a clarification stage, which is talking about the person's misconceptions, their mistaken thinking, somehow dealing with what might be irrational thinking about different aspects of their life. What comes to mind now is the work of, say, Albert Ellis and his rational emotive therapy, where there is a very deliberate attempt at confronting and challenging irrational thinking and presenting what amounts to rational or sensible thinking. Do you have any comments about this? As when a person is describing something or explaining something, and there is in fact a lot of what you might say irrational assumptions. What might you do in a situation like that? Would you question them in a sort of a classic Socratic dialogue and lead them into a conceptual trap?
More in that direction than any else, yes. Because sometimes the person has already learned that many people don't accept him at face value. So he would deny if I would go in that direction. If I go along and go ad absurdum, then we get to a point where he cannot go any farther because he has trapped himself. And that is the direction that I usually follow. I just tag along in the illogical, and this usually happens in only one session. It usually doesn't take more than one. And then all of a sudden the person finds, yeah, but I can't make this come true. I can't even prove this. This is not so. This is not logical. Maybe no, it is not logical. Where did you really get off the main trail? And how could you do differently? And then he makes the correction. And this is what I want. I don't want to make his corrections. I don't want to suggest his corrections. He has to make them himself.
So
it is the challenge to have the person find his insight and find his corrections and carry out his corrections.
So the creative challenge here is to lead the person further along than he has gone in his thinking, to an absurdity perhaps, or to the conclusion that he himself realizes this is untenable, this is foolish.
Yeah.
I recall a situation when we were consulting on a case, and the individual, this was a man who was living in a manner that really didn't suit the 20th century. And I remember your comment stating how it might be helpful to ask him if he, how he might have felt if he were in a different period, a different culture, which really seemed very suitable to his lifestyle. I mean, that of a prince who had just about anything he wanted. And I recall very gently and at the right moment asking this question rather innocently, and there was a smile on his face where he kind of recognized, oh, this direction seems to be a little foolish, but he then sort of backed off a bit and did not permit himself the full realization. But I can see where carrying it further to this illogical extreme puts the person in a kind of against the wall.
Yes, and he recognizes that, and then he does something about it. Because you see, again, we want the action from the client.
In order to get some action, particularly in a passive person, we're talking about encouraging the person to make moves. Now, in some cases, the person may make some moves which are not so logical or not so productive. But particularly in a passive person, what we're trying to do is to promote some kind of movement out of this passive position. We've also talked about the idea of very little steps. In so many cases, a person feels that any movement in a direction away from where they've been going seems immense, seems incredibly large. Do you have particular images or ways that you approach this idea of shrinking these felt impossibilities down to little bite-sized, manageable steps?
It is talking very much in abstract, and every case is different in this respect. A person lets you know very quickly how much he can take and how much he is willing to risk and to venture. And it is always astonishing to me to see when people begin to go in a positive direction, how they find that life is new to them, that they have never experienced life this particular way. Suppose a person never has had courage to do unknown things, and all of a sudden he ventures out to do something that is completely new to him, that he has never done before. And he gets the thrill of the newness of a thing, and then if he's halfway successful with it, he gets the encouragement out of it to do more of the same. And this is, again in abstract, mentioned what we try to do in reality, that people can see that things can be different, That what they have done all their lives doesn't have to be repeated again and again. They can do it in a different way. They can have a different approach. They can look at a different angle. I have often said, if people have, there are people who have a very different life. And if they have that difficulty in financial and sometimes with illness and other things, and I say, yes, you are busy climbing a mountain. And they agree, yes, it is climbing a mountain. I said, now, you see, a mountain has different sides. And there are many people who have the same difficulty, so they have the same type of a mountain to climb. And there are people who say it is very, very hot to climb that mountain because they climb on the south side. And there are other people who say it's very, very cold to climb the mountain because they climb on the north side. Now, you can also have the east and the west, and you can also go around. And you probably never thought about that. Now, this is a symbol.
Yes.
But I have never found that people can't understand this. And they usually smile, and they say, yes, I could do things a little bit differently. And then they begin to invent, because I don't give them advice how to do differently. They invent what they can do differently. And the same task they have had, all of a sudden, is not so heavy anymore. They feel it as lighter because they approach it differently.
Why is it that generally intelligent people become so blind to alternatives about solving certain problems? Is it because the alternatives do not permit them to have the kind of victory or the superiority feeling that they are seeking? Is this the excluding factor?
One of the factors, and one of the worst ones, is the habit formation. That people form habits in their approach to problems and to different circumstances in life. And they keep repeating that same pattern all the time. So the more people live in a creative way, the less patterns they have.
The less habits they have.
Yeah.
And it becomes easier to change what might be an efficiency habit for something that is suitable to the situation.
Yes.
Or that might be an improvement.
Yes,
one leaves oneself
indeed.
open. We have then perhaps the question of the anxiety that may come with what is unfamiliar.
Not only that, but anxiety mostly is connected with result. I am so afraid that if I try something different, that I will fail. That is so often, I mean, I see that in people all the time.
But the failure that is often anticipated is not a failure of being totally useless or incompetent. The failure is simply perhaps not being as wonderful or as superior
so
as one
that
considers.
is, again, the ideal people have about themselves and what they have created as an image that they want to present to the world. But also, there is a tremendous anxiety about making mistakes and failure. And people do not know that you learn the most from a mistake. They do not want to make a mistake and they don't want to look at it. And the amazing thing is that if they look at it and they correct and they make an attempt at correction, they have conquered something that they couldn't have conquered any other way. It begins with children. You see it in children. They are dreading making mistakes in the work that they have to write or something. So many mistakes. And they feel dumb. And I said, look, what is more, the amount of mistakes you made or the amount of things that you have right? And the amount of things that you have right is what is more, isn't it? So all you have to learn is how to correct these few mistakes, and then you know it all. Now this principle I use also with adults. You made a mistake in this particular situation. Now, how often have you done things correct? So all you have to do is look at what did not go well and find out how to correct this.
And the person says, I don't know how to correct this. I have never been able to correct it. Why should I be able to correct it now? You tell me how to correct it. What if they present it that way?
I invariably answer, that is not my life. It is your life. And I would not want to intrude on your life.
Oh, you're a devil.
No, but we
yes,
have to, you see, when they say a thing like that, they don't show respect for themselves
yes.
and for their life that was given to them. And I talk about how life was given to them and they have to make something out of it. Don't they agree? Yes, but I have always been unhappy and I've always been unfortunate. So what, can you give me an example of where you were unfortunate? And we go into the detail of what could you have done differently under the circumstances now that you look back on it and are that much wiser.
Now there is the point that the person needs to make a bridge to, that they are not the child that they once were.
Exactly. And sometimes I have to tell them.
If you remind me.
I said, which size shoes do you wear?
A good image.
And then I say, well, that's not the size you wore as a child, but you act as if you still were a child.
Now it's this as if the person at the moment almost leaves their adult thinking and feeling and at the moment acts as if they are 7 or 8 years old. It's almost like a fixation on a particular issue. And this is caused by the discouragement and the lack of conquering something that the person has never passed through.
And they couldn't have any more courage because they had a wrong goal.
Aha.
And so if we already have shown them what their goal was and that it led nowhere, that you have to have a goal that leads somewhere towards mankind and to be useful and to give your share, then they know already that what they have been doing in the past was useless. But it was maybe self-serving.
At what point, not as a rule, but generally, at what point do you show a person or help them see what they have been doing, what their goal, what their lifestyle, if you want to use that term, is?
At what point? I cannot tell you at what point. It follows logically out of what we are doing. And sometimes it is very quick, and sometimes it takes a little bit longer. I have not a set rule for this.
Okay. It seems to me in the past I'd had the impression that after a person, oftentimes after a person had made some movements in a new direction, that they were in a better place to look at what they had been doing.
Oh yes, definitely.
So that instead of saying right up front, your trouble is that you do this and this is a mistake and that's wrong, now go out and correct it, you're encouraging the person to move in a new direction. They move in this direction, feel a little better,
yes.
feel a little stronger, and then you say, and do you remember what you used to do? And then you point out
exactly.
the goal. So that is
exactly.
more of a face-saving, more of a gentler recognition of the lifestyle.
I wouldn't call it face-saving. It is a recognition that you can do differently even if you have made mistakes, and that you brought something on yourself that you first blamed on the world. Because mostly people blame others or the world or circumstances, or that they don't have money or whatever it is, that their father did so-and-so, their mother did so-and-so, And that is why they became the person they were.
Now, when somebody blames the world and they're going in the wrong direction, there's also, it seems to me, a kind of an implied avoidance of something. There's something that's being left out.
Mm-hmm.
And it is what is being left out sometimes that may be difficult to see, because you're not looking at an action saying this is a mistaken action. You have to imagine what the person is not doing in saying this.
Yeah, but he usually brings that out very clearly. Yes. Yeah, we're talking in abstract now.
Well, let's say, for example, the individual who has not really had an interest in other people and has left out a feeling for other people. This person is probably not going to bring this up.
That depends what the need of the person is. If a person sees that he has isolated himself by his own actions, sometimes this takes a while. I'm thinking of a case that I had, a very long time ago in Holland. A person who was older and felt very desperate and said, life doesn't mean anything for me anymore, I don't know what to do. And finally we came to the conclusion that he really had done nothing to connect with other people. And he always stayed away from other people. And now he had a feeling that you have to do something with other people in order to exist for your own feelings. And he found by himself a kind of activity that brought him in contact with other people, where he was helping other people out. And it was first on a kind of business-like connection, and finally he was became so interested in other people that he started doing a lot for the community and for everybody else. It was amazing how he came out and really became a happy human being. But he was tremendously unhappy first when he came and I saw him. And completely isolated.
Let us say an individual, when working with you, comes to an understanding of what they have been doing that doesn't work, what they have been omitting, and has made some attempts in a direction for an improvement, and then begins to say to you, I think I need to go in a new direction, but I don't know what this is. I mean, it's like they come to a realization that their whole life has been going in the wrong direction. Does the person have to struggle with this by themselves as to what this new direction is?
I'm afraid so, yes.
It sounds like a very critical moment.
It is a critical moment, but you are describing a person who is using helplessness to get out of doing what he should be doing. So probably we have already a collection of events where he did not do anything about the situation he was in, but waited till it was done to him or for him. And I often have these people, they exist quite a bit, because it is always nice to be the follower and not to be the one who takes the initiative. And then I say, you know, life is often like when the wind is blowing and there are a lot of leaves that have fallen off the trees, and the wind blows the leaves and they go in a direction. And actually what you're telling me reminds me of this. And they catch on very quickly that yes, they are blown like a leaf by the wind. And they have not taken any action themselves. So then they recognize this and say, now, then I should do something about it. And I invariably say, I think your conclusion is correct. What are you planning? Then I hold on. And I don't let go till I know what plan they are making. I don't know what to do. Well, let's think about it. Let's talk about it.
And then if the person says, but how can I talk about it if I don't know what to do? And how can I think about it if I...
They don't do that.
They don't do that.
No, they don't do that. No. No. Because if they are that far, they really want to...
They want to make
to act, yes. If they come to that insight, they are already far enough. Yes.
Now, it would seem, from my experience, that when a person then begins to make really significant steps in a new direction, that the world looks very different to them. They really go undergo an enormous change.
Oh, I have had people at that moment who had been coming once a week and said, I have to come sooner because what I discovered I have to discuss with you. And then they have just a flood of things that they have discovered. And it is an entirely different world from what I thought it would be. I've heard these things tell me. And they begin to connect with people. So it's very gratifying, that's all I can say.
When do you feel that the work is finished with a client? What is your sense of this person
to terminate?
Is ready to terminate, yes.
Well, usually we both feel that people have a feeling that they can do so much more, and they have been telling me for several times what they have been doing. Their action is better, their results are better, their cooperation with people is better, they feel for other people, and this is all, they are functioning, in other words. And then we diminish. And I say, well, maybe, would you like to come back next month instead of in 2 weeks or so? We diminish gradually. And sometimes people call me after 3 or 4 months and say, I would like to talk to you once to tell you all the things that I've been doing and how I feel, and just as an evaluation, you know, and as a kind of friendly discussion. And then, yes, then if everything goes well and the problems are solved, especially younger people who, for instance, have had a lot of difficulty in finding a companion or finding a future wife or finding a future husband, and now they have found the person and how they have built up the relationship and what they have done and how different it was from when they had so-and-so and that ended so miserably and they were so heartbroken and everything else, and what they were planning and how the work is going and how the relationship with friends was, and that they have met new people, then I know they are on their way and they can handle difficulty when it comes, because they're not afraid of it anymore. You can't take difficulties out of life. But if people have learned how to handle difficulty, they are functioning. And sometimes maybe something happens that is such a calamity that we can't solve it. Personally, I would dread a third world war. I think it would be terrible. But I wouldn't go down. I've survived the second one and the occupation in Holland. So you also learn, if you have conquered a thing like that, that pretty rough circumstances can be taken in stride.
It seems like an experience that many people are not too familiar with.
Pardon me?
The experience of conquering something that is very difficult.
Oh, yes.
It's not very common. I know for many of the people who...
No, but hasn't life in general, in I would say after the Second World War, especially in the United States, hasn't life been easy and comfortable
yes.
and spoiling?
I think the spoiling is perhaps,
The
because
spoiling.
one can always look for challenges that makes life interesting and exciting and meaningful. Having it easy may simply be that one is freed from some laborious tasks that maybe one doesn't prefer, but then one is free to take on something that is more meaningful.
Yeah, and
perhaps
many
more
people
demanding.
do.
Yeah.
Many people
So
do.
having an easier life does not mean that one necessarily will be spoiled. One may take on something
Absolutely
substantial
not, no. No, but it is what you do with what you got.
with your free time.
Again. And America has offered so much to just look at all the people from other countries who come here and say this is paradise as compared where they came from. So then also people think it is logical that I'm entitled to all of this. Well, nobody is entitled to things.
Well, you have given us a great deal today. We are coming to the end of our tape, which is one of the natural limits of linear.
Time goes so fast
But
when
yes,
you
it does.
start talking
We've had
about
a
these
wonderful
things.
couple of hours.
Well, that's great.
Thank you so very much.
I'm glad it will help some people. And otherwise, as long as I'm here, you can always ask me.
Thank you.